Chosen one, welcome, radiant souls, yes, you. The ones who walk into rooms and shift the atmosphere without saying a word. This space is for you. Not for the ordinary, not for the crowd pleasers, but for the ones who've been whispered about, watched from the shadows, and mimicked without credit. You felt it, haven't you? That pull, that presence, that quiet knowing that you're not here to blend in. You're here to awaken. Let's be clear. You're not just existing. You're disrupting patterns, bending timelines, and living proof that authenticity still wins in a world obsessed with performance. And whether they admit it or not, people feel you. Long before they know your story, they feel your frequency. That's why they talk. That's why they stare. That's why they try to become watered-down versions of a truth they were never built to carry. And you don't need to force it. You don't chase. You don't compete. You embody. You've already survived storms that should have stolen your light. Instead, you shine brighter. You've turned pain into power, silence into strategy, and every exit into elevation. You are not too much. You are exactly enough to rattle every illusion built on pretending. So, if you've ever wondered why you're the topic, the reference point, the one they can't stop watching, it's because you're the blueprint they never saw coming. And today, we're not shrinking. We're owning it. Loudly, boldly, unapologetically. Let them whisper. You were born to echo. Let's dive in, looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. You are the kind of force that unsettles illusions without trying. A quiet presence that reveals the difference between pretending and being. When you step into a space, it is not about confrontation or exposure. It is simply that your authenticity holds a mirror to what others have long ignored within themselves. They have built layers of excuses, hiding timidity behind clever words, and masking unfulfilled dreams with shallow confidence. But you make those disguises feel heavy. You did not chase approval or bend yourself into shapes that fit, and that is precisely what stings. Your progress is not a reminder of their failure, but of the roads they refused to walk. They had the same hours, the same canvas, but while they chose appearances, you chose substance. That decision echoes in every conversation about you. You are not their adversary. You are their unspoken evidence of what they abandoned. It is easier for them to whisper or twist stories than to face the ache of seeing someone live with a depth they feared to claim. You do not need to argue your worth. Your path speaks for itself. You did not strip them bare, but your existence shows what cannot be hidden anymore. They call your name not because you seek attention, but because your presence reminds them that they once settled for less. There is an unshaken gravity in your presence, an energy that rearranges the room without a word. It is not about being bold or demanding eyes to turn. It is the kind of energy that unsettles masks without even touching them. Those who lean on facades or control feel the tension immediately. You are not impressed by posturing, and that quiet strength unsettles the insecure. They cannot decode it, and that discomfort makes them talk once you are gone. It is not noise that makes you stand out, but the stillness that reveals everything fake. Your refusal to play along with hollow performances makes others question themselves, even when you do not mean to. Some will retreat, others will lash out, but all of them feel the weight of being seen. You are not chasing applause, and that makes those who thrive on it feel exposed. Your energy leaves an aftertaste, a silent reminder that there is something deeper they cannot imitate. They gossip not because of what you do, but because of what they cannot ignore. The undeniable impact of a presence that speaks without sound. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. There's something about your presence that turns ordinary moments into questions people can't answer. They don't just glance at you. They analyze, dissect, wonder how you keep rising without noise. How you carry something that doesn't quite fit the world's mold. You navigate through tension with a kind of poise that doesn't look rehearsed. It unsettles expectations. While others grasp for instructions and validation, you seem tuned into a wavelength they cannot access. No grand performance, no spotlight chase. Yet somehow, you become the axis around which attention turns. There's an unfamiliar rhythm in your steps, as if you're responding to signals no one else can hear. That mystery breeds curiosity. Even those who smile to your face often retreat to corners just to discuss what they couldn't explain. You do not follow the emotional formulas others cling to. You recover with grace where bitterness is expected. You show patience in moments where vengeance is the norm. It doesn't compute to them. They've witnessed collapses over lesser storms, but you keep expanding. It makes people question their own definitions of endurance. Some try to copy your calm. Others mock what they can't understand. Still, the conversations continue. Low-tone questions about how someone can seem so internally fueled. Not from a place of arrogance, but as if something timeless whispers to you when the world gets loud. And maybe that's what makes people stare too long and speak too much. You're not seeking attention. They just can't dismiss what challenges their version of reality. You unsettle mediocrity not by defying it loudly, but by quietly making it irrelevant. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. They never anticipated resistance from someone who moved with such unwavering steadiness. Every tactic, every veiled jab, every twisted attempt to redefine boundaries fell flat, not because they were weak, but because they were predictable. No pleading eyes, no frantic explanations, no submission to their illusions of superiority. What they met instead was silence forged from self-trust, presence anchored in internal clarity. It wasn't retaliation that disarmed them. It was the absence of reaction. What disturbed them wasn't being rejected, but being irrelevant to someone they believed they could shape. Control was their currency, and it lost all value in your atmosphere. That dissonance fractured their perception of dominance. They won battles with noise, but here they met calm that wouldn't bow. What started as a game of manipulation ended in obsession, not born of love or loss, but of failure. They failed to bend what refused to contort. They failed to dim what didn't depend on their light. The quiet endurance you carried became their reminder of where their power ended. And that invisible line, where they could not touch, tarnish, or twist, still echoes like unfinished business. Not because you owe them anything, but because you were the moment they realized not all fires yield to wind. They pretend they don't see, but their silence is louder than applause. They scoff when others listen, yet tune in alone with sharpened attention. Not out of admiration, but hunger. Hunger for the insight they can't birth on their own. They mimic without grace, borrow without permission, digest your essence like a hidden recipe they won't admit tastes better than theirs. Your way of evolving, shedding layers without spectacle, haunts them. Not because you shout, but because you don't need to. They avoid giving credit, yet recalibrate their beliefs when yours prove grounded. Their criticism is a mask worn over curiosity. You are the mirror they both fear and need. They trace your steps in secret, hoping to arrive at confidence without ever walking through vulnerability. They paint over your influence and call it originality. Still, every shift they make carries your fingerprint. You don't need to be mentioned for your presence to echo. They won't admit it, but your truth forces them to confront what they've buried. And while their mouth may never form praise, their path betrays their reverence. They'll always return, not for you, but for what being near your authenticity awakens in them. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. They assumed there'd be no echo after the harm. They were sure the silence meant submission, that the stillness was a sign of defeat. But without spectacle or retaliation, you shifted far beyond the range of their reach. The story they tried to end became the very chronicle that haunts them. Not because you turned bitter, but because you turned radiant. Their missteps etched themselves into the timeline without you lifting a voice or striking a blow. Growth became your reply. Where they sowed confusion, you birthed clarity. Where they bet on your collapse, you quietly constructed a life they cannot look at without flinching. The irony cuts deeper than vengeance ever could. They assumed backlash would be loud, that reckoning would wear armor. Instead, it came cloaked in your evolution. They expected rage. What they received was your rebirth. No announcement, no spectacle, just the steady unfolding of someone who refused to stay in the version they tried to reduce you to. Now, their discomfort isn't fueled by external punishment, but by their own reflection cast in the aftermath of your progress. Every time your presence surfaces, It stirs a shadow they can't outrun. They dress their betrayals in charm, their sabotage in silence, thinking time would erase the trail. It didn't. Time, instead, sculpted you into a quiet storm they didn't plan for. You became a symbol they can't ignore, a marker of the fact that every seed of harm they planted bloomed into a garden they were never invited into. There's no satisfaction in their victories, because each one is tainted by the memory of who they wronged. Not through confrontation, but through distance, you became their consequence. Not with vengeance, but with presence, you unsettled their comfort. The glow they tried to dim now burns at the edge of every thought they try to suppress. What they thought would fade became the silence that echoes the loudest. Some people walk into moments meant to elevate them and choose pride instead. Their part in your life wasn't by coincidence. It carried meaning, responsibility, alignment. But they missed it. The opportunity to honor something rare was right in front of them, and they responded with self-interest. Instead of meeting you with clarity, they chose confusion. Instead of rising to the moment, they retreated into insecurity. What was placed in their path as a quiet catalyst for healing, they treated as disposable. The role was never forced on them. They were invited. And yet they fumbled it, not because they were unaware, but because they weren't ready to carry anything that couldn't serve their ego. What they betrayed was not just your trust, but a chance to be part of something more meaningful than anything shallow admiration could offer. They turned sacred ground into rumor mills, traded alignment for convenience, and underestimated the cost of such a choice. You didn't retaliate. You didn't unravel. You just walked forward, and that quiet departure rewrote everything. Now they sift through connections that feel hollow, conversations that echo with nothingness, all while a part of them remains rooted in a memory they can't outgrow. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. They try to replicate your presence, but always end up with fragments. What once was simple, your listening, your steadiness, your patience, now feels like something they can't replace. Not because you were loud or demanding, but because you held weight in ways they didn't understand until it was gone. Their regret lives not in words, but in the pause after every failed attempt to recreate what was once effortless. Your absence became their teacher, not out of spite, but out of reflection. The discomfort they feel isn't punishment, it's recognition. They didn't just lose a person. They lost access to a moment they were trusted with, and every new emptiness reminds them they weren't ready to hold what was meant to help shape them. There's an unplaceable charge you bring that unsettles the air before your voice even meets the room. It's not something surface can explain. No style, no performance, no crafted impression could account for it. You move with a resonance that stirs people beneath the surface, tapping into parts of them they didn't realize were waiting to be awakened. For some, it feels like clarity brushing past confusion. For others, it's a disruption that rattles the walls they've built around their illusions. Either way, nothing remains untouched. Some lean in, magnetized by something they can't define. They feel safer near you, more honest with themselves, like they've stumbled into a space where masks fall off on their own. Others, though, tense up, fidget in your presence as if their spirit knows it's being read. It's not confrontation that unsettles them, it's recognition. You don't expose people. Their own unresolved layers do the revealing once you're near. It's not about perfection. It's about the frequency you carry, one that doesn't bend for comfort or disguise itself to fit the room. You were never trying to make an entrance. You simply arrived as you are, and that was enough to shift emotional climates. You mirror the internal landscape back to people, and not everyone is prepared to see their own cracks in that reflection. The ones who are, leave better. The ones who aren't, leave disturbed. You become their pivot point, whether they acknowledge it or not. That's why you stay in their thoughts longer than the conversation lasted. That's why your name circles back in rooms you don't walk into anymore. There's no act to copy, no blueprint to mimic, because this isn't a performance, it's encoded in your being. What you carry can't be taught, sold, or reproduced. It doesn't make you superior. It just means you were crafted to echo beyond the visible. Some run from that. Some chase it. But no one forgets it. You weren't a moment to them. You were the shift they couldn't explain away. There are roles in people's pasts that remain etched no matter how many drafts they attempt to rewrite. And you are one of those irremovable truths. They tried to alter the memory, dressed up fables to suit their guilt, and handed out skewed versions like souvenirs from a place they barely survived. In every retelling, the lines blurred, but one fact stayed solid. The part you played never fit into their revision. You weren't just a name they could smear. You were a turning point they couldn't spin. They could twist perception, but they could never undo presence. Their hope was that time would fade your impact into fiction, but instead, it sharpened the contrast. While they reshaped the tale to paint themselves in softer light, you lived your truth without defense, without announcements. They needed to be believed. You just needed to keep growing. And that was enough. Because no lie, no matter how polished, can cancel out what people eventually feel when they watch you become more than what was said about you. You became the quiet contradiction that unraveled every falsehood with grace, not vengeance. What they buried comes back every time your name stirs in conversation, not through scandal, but through stillness, because you never collapsed into the narrative they constructed. Instead of playing the part they cast you in, you left the theater and built a stage of your own. And now, that elevation is the part they never expected. They thought they could cast you in shadows while they played the hero. But the spotlight followed you anyway. Their discomfort isn't rooted in your success alone. It's rooted in what your success says about their truth. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. The version of you they feared most, the one who healed, rose, and carried on without bitterness, is the one they now can't erase. You weren't just a chapter they regret. You're the line they can't skip. Every step you take forward calls their story into question. And everyone you gather whispers the version they tried to silence. They didn't lose a character in their tale. They lost the anchor, the only one who offered realness when the whole scene was built on illusion. And deep down, they know the ending they scripted didn't stick, because your evolution turned their edits into lies that no longer pass the read. There's a kind of strength that unsettles people, not because it's loud, but because it shouldn't exist. You walked through seasons meant to erase you entirely. There were moments stitched with silence, so deep it made the soul question its own worth. Yet you emerged. Not bruised and bitter, but forged. They assumed you'd become a cautionary tale, not a quiet revolution. But instead of collapse, there was expansion. Instead of retreat, there was rebirth. That reality doesn't sit well with those who watched from the sidelines, waiting for your end to arrive. They speak your name with confusion now, not understanding how you still rise when everything around you once crumbled. What they fail to grasp is that transformation doesn't ask for permission. Your journey disrupted their understanding of what breaking looks like. They've seen others fade for less, and yet you became a force shaped by impact, not destroyed by it. That resilience is unsettling because it reflects what they fear they cannot find in themselves. So they mock what they cannot mirror, analyze what they cannot access. You don't move for applause. You move because purpose whispers where chaos once shouted. That's what makes you impossible to predict. Your path isn't designed by validation. It's carved by inner clarity. That difference terrifies those still anchored in performance. You are the reminder that endurance doesn't need an audience, and that survival isn't always loud. It can be steady, graceful, and wildly defiant. They weren't ready for the version of you that came from the fire, not charred, but shining. Some people only realize what they lost when comparison becomes unavoidable. Out loud, they speak detachment. In silence, they scroll through past moments like they hold a code they still haven't cracked. They said you were replaceable, yet every new connection feels like a shadow trying to mimic a light it never carried. They reached for replicas, hoping familiarity would make the absence sting less, but substance can't be duplicated. It's not just what you brought, it's how you saw them when they were blind to themselves. You didn't flatter. You reflected. You didn't compete. You elevated. That made your presence feel layered in a way others can't imitate, no matter how closely they dress the part. On the surface, they wear pride. Underneath, it's memory. Memory of the steadiness you offered, the depth you carried, the way your presence softened what their ego tried to harden. Now, Everything after you feel scripted, shallow, and out of rhythm. They won't say it, but they measure every bond by your impact. The jokes, the smiles, the posts, they're all cover stories. Because behind the performative detachment is someone scrolling through reminders, tracing back to the one who left without burning bridges, but still managed to set a new standard they can't surpass. You weren't just a chapter. They keep rereading a story they never finished properly, hoping the ending might change. But it won't, because no matter how far they run from it, your echo follows like truth they can't outrun. Some paths disturb not because they're loud, but because they dare to go where others only dream. The change you initiated didn't just affect you. It rattled the entire foundation others were comfortably built on. You weren't just choosing growth. You were dismantling inherited illusions, questioning rituals passed off as righteousness, refusing to inherit burdens disguised as duty. That courage became offensive to those who mistook dysfunction for legacy. When you stepped away from the roles carved in silence and survival, it sent ripples through every narrative that relied on your compliance. Their discomfort isn't rooted in your choices. It's rooted in what your choices reveal. You exposed how much was ignored, how many excuses were recycled into myths, how pain was recycled through generations and dressed up as strength. You saw the cracks no one was willing to name. While some wear tradition like armor, you saw it as a weight that needed to be set down. And when you set it down, they were left holding their own stories, without your silence to protect them. That shift cost you their comfort, but it gave you freedom. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. You didn't raise your voice, you raised the standard. That's what unsettled them. Not everyone wants healing if it means losing the attention attached to their wounds. Not everyone wants freedom if it means surrendering control. You left the script mid-scene, and suddenly, the play couldn't go on. Now, they call you rebellious, too sensitive, too distant. Anything to avoid admitting you simply saw through the act. What you broke was never love. It was the illusion of unity built on quiet suffering. And that unraveling is exactly what they fear, because it means the story must finally be rewritten. There are exits that close doors. Then there are exits that leave a pulse behind. You became the latter. Though time moved forward and you took your steps away, something about your presence didn't vanish. It multiplied, not in volume, but in weight. You disrupted their rhythm not by force, but by reflection. You stood in their space and held a mirror they were never ready to face, one that revealed where pretense ends and truth begins. Even in absence, that mirror hasn't shattered. They fill rooms with noise, jokes, distractions, but none of it mutes the echo you left behind. It's not obsession. It's the vibration of a truth they didn't have the tools to process. You weren't trying to fix them. You simply showed up whole in a space built on fragments. That difference still speaks when the lights go out and the applause fades. Their conversations keep circling your name, not because of drama, but because healing leaves fingerprints on every wound it brushes against. You were a reminder that growth is possible, that masks can be dropped, that real connection demands courage. And that's the part they can't delete. You weren't just a memory. They are still standing in the space you cleared. And even if they never say it out loud, they feel the shift you caused every time they return to silence. Some people mistake reflection for attack, especially when their world is built on projection. You walked in without performance, without need for spotlight, and that's exactly what made the illusion crumble. They weren't prepared for someone who didn't play by unspoken rules, who didn't shrink to keep the peace, or pretend not to notice the cracks. You didn't confront with words, you exposed with existence. The calm you carried stripped away their performances, and without intending to, you became the moment their version of truth could no longer stand unchallenged. They couldn't silence the shift you caused, so they rebranded you. When honesty feels like invasion and boundaries feel like betrayal, those who benefit from confusion will twist clarity into offense. And that's what they did. They wrote a version of events that made them comfortable and cast you as the problem. Not because it was accurate, but because it was easy. Owning their part would mean losing the power they found in distortion, so they traded reality for control.